YCS New Jersey, the first event of the new set, new format, has just been concluded, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about each deck and what went down, what happened, etc., etc. So you can feel free to tab out and just do your thing and leave this on in the background. Bit of a more podcasty kind of style entry here, so feel free to let this run. Just really quickly as well, before we begin and get into this breakdown, just a little shout out to the sponsors and stuff. If you guys need any cards, booster boxes, packs, sleeves, anything at all Yu-Gi-Oh related, then please check out YJoCity.com and make sure you use the promo code FarfaFIGO for 5% off all of your orders. So with the advent of Dark Saviors, I think it's very kind of unsurprising at all that Sky Strikers were going to be doing as well as they have in this event, just because of the fact that the deck and the engine itself is extremely splashable and is extremely just powerful for basically just one or two card interactions. And I think, you know, no one is probably going to be super shocked at what exactly went down. So I think maybe just beginning with pure Sky Striker kind of makes sense to go kind of logically here in terms of its, because it serves as a base for like many other decks. So I think I'll start with the Sky Striker pure deck itself. Now this is something that I probably personally would have expected to do way better, just because the deck functions very similarly to Zoo. And that it's very much controlling the board and stunning your opponent with hand traps and making sure that your opponent can't advance their game state while picking apart the advantage, getting +1s here and there, so on and so forth. Now, this deck only took about 10% of the top cut spots, which is quite low, really, for like, you know, the pure deck itself. If we were to consider this, you know, a deck of its own, then yeah, this is a little bit low. You know, with an actual Sky Striker deck utilizing the field spells, multi-roll, etc., etc. I personally would have expected this to do way better, actually. Maybe around about, you know, the 20% mark or something. Probably double the amount of tops than it did, but it just didn't. Now, this is probably just because of the fact that not exactly the Sky Striker pure is bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that, you know, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the 50%, half the pie chart. Sky Striker Trickstar taking half the top cut spots, big 50% here. And this is mostly because of the fact that Trickstars do kind of function as almost like a very pseudo Sky Striker deck on their own. So you have like all of your hand traps, and you have a decent amount of pressure that you can apply, and you have your in-engine disruption as well, if you don't draw the hand traps, obviously, like your reincarnation. So I think it's fair to say to the deck that Trickstar operates kind of like in a similar sort of win condition, and when you combine them both together, it just naturally creates this harmonious relationship where the decks just complement one another really well. I wouldn't have been that shocked to see this deck win the event, but I think that in hindsight, seeing this many tops for it, I think I'm a little bit surprised. I wouldn't particularly expect it to do that well. Like I said, I kind of expected the Sky Striker deck to do well. So moving on to the next part, and that is Goki. Now Goki is a deck where is much stronger in America, so it's unsurprising that Link Karibo putting in a lot of work for that deck over there. 2-card interactions compared to European like 3 or 4-card interactions for the exact same combo and end board. It's a deck that just is heavily reliant on comboing off and being able to do it as much as it can. Turn 1 to be able to extra link you, stop you from actually being able to like function with your deck, or simply just creating a big enough board that you just simply don't have enough resources to punch through. So this deck is going to be kind of stunned a lot because of, you know, the prevalence of the Sky Striker deck, the Sky Striker Trickstar deck as well. These decks having all these hand traps, and Goki having abilities to play through with some extenders through this disruption, but in a format that is dominated by, you know, 6, 9 hand traps, maybe even 12 hand traps as a standard. It's really hard for a deck that just kind of has this pseudo FTK to really push forward and do much of anything at all, honestly. I think that with Goki's ability to do these crazy things is obviously very stunted by the fact that it's just quite easily stopped and disrupted. Very much a glass cannon deck, a deck that has to kind of just go all in and gamble with, you know, the opening hand and pray it just kind of sticks. The grinding ability, it's okay at grinding, but I think it obviously can't compare to the ability to grind to something like Sky Strikers and Trickstars, which are just way more kind of consistent than Goki. Now Goki, personally, I just think this deck is like really unhealthy for the game because of this extra link ability and because of just this like multiple sort of pseudo locks that it creates with like can't be targeted, can't be destroyed, can't do anything, right? So I'm kind of happy that it didn't do as well, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this deck still floating around in the future events. And it's definitely something that you're going to have to keep on your radar. Of course, 20% is a very respectable number of tops to take for the first event, and I don't think it's something that should be pushed aside and ignored completely altogether. So Goki doing quite well, taking a fairly strong sort of appearance is the word I'm looking for at this event. So I think that it's a solid number. I personally would have predicted something like this. I personally would have thought, yeah, that's a good number for Goki. That's kind of how much I expect. Maybe a little bit less, maybe closer to 15 than 20% for top cut spots, just because of the fact that, I do really think it is such a glass cannon deck. But yeah, not doing as well as Sky Striker and Sky Striker Trickstar, of course. Now, the other decks, not really much to say, honestly. There's just a couple of tops between them. Trickstars, pure Trickstars, of course. I'm not really much to talk about, honestly. It's kind of everything that I mentioned with the Sky Striker Trickstar deck kind of falls into this category. Obviously, it just kind of lacks a little bit more kind of oomph to it. Doesn't have that OTK ability and kind of struggles to deal with, A Assault Core equipped with B. Shoutouts to Calvin. Altergeists, not taking anywhere near as many spots as I expected. I would have thought maybe they would take, maybe a couple more, 10 to 15% of the top cut spot. Altergeist, really disappointing and not doing much of anything. I think back row decks, it's really hard for these things to kind of struggle through and do much in a format where you have things like Jamming Wave and Burner, and it's quite tough for back row decks to really survive evenly matched. There's just so many ways to deal with back row decks these days that it's quite just so difficult to do anything without like some kind of like insane like floodgate or something. Pendulum and ABC and Spiral, one top a piece, not really anything to say. The Pendulum deck, honestly, shoutouts to Triff, but it's a fucking mess. Okay, the deck's terrible. I don't know how that deck managed to top. To be fair, it's playing like 15 Garnets, but what can you say? It did a thing, so that's awesome, and congrats to him. To Calvin to hand with ABC, of course. I mean, fucking that guy's an idiot. Whatever. Spiral. Really, really surprising. Very, very surprising that I only got one top. I think that some of the silly things that Spiral can do with the nightmares and stuff, absolutely ludicrous number of boards. Blinding second with tough and stuff like that. Very, very crazy deck that can just like pick apart boards really well. So, do I have a logical explanation as to why this deck didn't do so well? It's hard to say, honestly. I think that it probably just requires one or two more extra cards to actually do anything and function than something like Sky Strikers and Trickstars. And compared to Goki as well, the extenders that this deck has are, well, I'd say they're probably around about the same, but you're kind of doing just the same thing as Goki is, but with more kind of cards required, really is like what you're kind of doing. So I think like Spiral is maybe best suited to going second. I did actually manage to check out the deck that did top, but it's not really much of anything to be shocked by if it's just one. I don't think it's like something you have to kind of like think about for the long term. Now, finally, just before we conclude, the last deck that I do want to talk about is True Draco, and completely surprised, shocked. I would have predicted at least a top from True Draco. True Draco taking absolutely nothing, not even one singular top cut spot at this YCS by True Draco. Just the ability to run all these insane floodgates and stuff. It seems that the removal of Masterpiece really has crippled the deck, and the abilities kind of the deck's ability to actually establish some kind of win condition of sorts just not really being a thing. So True Draco, yeah, whatever. I mean, am I sad to see that deck not top? Absolutely fucking not. I couldn't care less if that deck never tops again. But the point is that I would have expected a few more, just because the ability to run so many hand traps, so many floodgates that are actually really quite good against Sky Strikers and Gokis, etc., etc. But I suppose it just doesn't have that same pressure anymore. Like, yes, it can stop your opponent from playing, but it doesn't have much to actually do proactively compared to something like having the Masterpiece, which does act as this like insane amount of pressure that puts your opponent on a clock and demands an out immediately. So surprised that True Draco didn't get any kind of a rundown at all. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching and listening. This has been my top 32 deck breakdown, and yeah, hopefully this format will shape up to be a little bit more exciting than just Kid Touch Turbo, but we'll see how it goes. What are your thoughts about this format? What are your thoughts about this breakdown, and what did you expect to see more of or less of, and is this kind of what you would have predicted? Thanks for watching, and until next time, farewell.